oturumlarında bizim için özel bir konferans olacak. Çünkü aşağı yukarı enstitünün kurulduğu dönemlerden itibaren, 2012'den itibaren Ercüment hocamız bizimle beraber çalışıyor. Uzun bir doktora serüveni oldu Ercüment hocanın ama hayırlısıyla güzel bir şekilde neticelendi. Biliyorsunuz doktorasını bitirdi ve inşallah o doktora tezinde çalıştığı konuda hakikaten Türkiye'nin yakın tarihi tecrübesindeki zihni dönüşümü işte popüler bilim dergileri üzerinden özellikle çalışmıştı. Evet. Doğrusu çok istifade edeceğimizi düşündüğüm bir metin. Kendisini tebrik ediyoruz şimdiden. İnşallah onu dinledikten sonra da üzerine beraber değerlendirmeler yapacağız.
Teşekkür ederim.
Teşekkür ediyorum.
Çok sağ olun.
Kolay gelsin.
Sağ olun. Okay, thank you very much for this kind introduction. So, I will share today a chapter from my thesis, not the whole thesis, but a chapter, the last chapter. And the title is An Islamicate Deism, the Making of an Ottoman Scientific Language. This is, of course, general. You will see that my, I'm sorry. At the center of my focus is Şemseddin Sami and one of his journals. So because it is a chapter from my thesis, let me very, very briefly tell you about my thesis. The title of my thesis is The Pursuit of the Modern Mind, Popularization of Science, Development of the Middle Classes and Religious Transformation in the Ottoman Empire, 1860-1880. So everything is there. So it is about popularization of science. It is about how modern scientific knowledge was spread among Ottoman reading public. I called it popularization because the target audience was the non-expert rather than the expert. Second concern related to this was religious transformation. What kind of an impact did the spread of new knowledge have upon religious articulation or religious understanding? And as I developed my study, I realized that that was connected to, it had this intellectual transformation had a social dimension, which was the development of the middle classes. And all of them, these three, were connected, were part and parcel of what is called modernization. So hence the title of my thesis. One major concern in my thesis was to follow the specific discursive processes through which modern scientific knowledge was adopted and naturalized by the local Ottoman culture. So we know that science was transferred, it's spread, etc. But what were the specific discursive processes? What were the specific discursive strategies in all this transformation? So this was a main concern in my thesis. And a crucial concept regarding this was naturalization. So there are some theories about how knowledge is transferred, but a major emphasis in my study was that the transfer of knowledge is not like taking something, an object, from a foreign setting and bringing it to a local and native setting. It was more than that. It was a cultural translation. And when we talk about cultural translation, there involves other dimensions. The setting in which this new knowledge was transferred was a special moment in Ottoman history where the Ottomans tried to establish or found or create a nation, an Ottoman nation, and citizens. The international setting was a setting of colonialism. So the cultural transformation, cultural translation was constrained, or there were concerns about how to create an Ottoman nation and how to resist colonialism and how to undo the sense of European supremacy while this knowledge was transformed from the West to the Ottoman setting. And also the whole process was constrained by the cultural backgrounds of translators and, of course, their addressees. So by naturalization, I meant all the cultural processes that involved in the transfer of what is called or what is defined as useful knowledge from a foreign to a native setting with a clear goal of keeping the self-respect of the native receivers. So those who receive the new knowledge should not lose their self-respect as a consequence. So that was a primary concern of those who translated, who transformed this knowledge, or at least some of them. It should reinforce a moral superiority and an optimism for the future. So these were the goals of those who were transferring this knowledge. And I analyzed various Ottoman science journals from 1860 to 1880. And despite the later discourse of a clash between science and religion, I observed that the journals under scrutiny here were promoting modern science through the Islamicate culture, not in spite of it. And another observation was that, or this is not an observation, but a framework that I suggested is to conceive all the process as an organic transformation of religious and traditional language. So here I will share with you a specific case, which is the journal Hafta, the week by Şemseddin Sami. Oh, I am sorry. Okay, the one you see and the one I see are different. Yeah. What do you see now? You see nothing. Okay. Let's start from the beginning. What do you see? Okay. I'm sorry. Let's go very fast. Okay, here. So and also the time is changed. Okay. So Şemseddin Sami. You can. Good. Okay. Mm-hmm. So I told you that this is one chapter. This is the last chapter on my dissertation. The first 4 chapters try to capture how the traditional discourses try to adapt to the change. In my last chapter, which is on Şemseddin Sami's Hafta, I try to see how a figure like Şemseddin Sami, who is known to be a modernizer, in what ways the Islamicate cultural tradition showed itself, manifested itself in his writings. So very, very briefly, he was born in 1850 in Albania and died in 1904 in Istanbul. He's a journalist, an intellectual, and known to be a modernizer. And he has many novels, theatrical works, journal articles, lexicons, and encyclopedias. An important work of him is Taşşuk-ı Talat ve Fitnat, The Love of Talat and Fitnat, is known to be the first Turkish novel, but which is not exactly true. There was another one by Vartan Pasha. It was produced in Turkish, but written with Armenian alphabets. So this is not exactly the first Turkish novel. He has Kamus-u Alam, a 6-volume encyclopedia on history, geography, and biographies of influential figures. He has Turkish, French lexicons. He was very much interested in the teaching of, in simplification of the teaching of Arabic, so he experimented with a new method of teaching Arabic. And also he produced a series, pocket library, which was on like scientific issues. As you can see, sky, earth, human being, Islamic civilization, women and mythology were some of these titles. I didn't study all of them, but I focused on the journal, Hafta, which was published for 20 issues in 1880. And most of these articles were taken from his previous work, which is called the Pocket Library. So the ultimate aim of Sami, Şemseddin Sami, was to promote modern scientific knowledge and its prestige among the Ottoman reading public. This is something that I should underline. We have to keep it in mind. So the ultimate aim, because I will now give you examples from natural theology and the religious elements in his language, etc. But this should not divert us from his main purpose. His main purpose is to promote modern science and its prestige. A second thing that we should keep in mind that his scientific language, even it involved some religious elements, traditional elements, it was not apologetic and it was not salvationist. You will see what I mean in a second. So first, he tried to construct a scientific universe. So let's say 70% of his writings or the issues that he covered is about demystifying the natural world, constructing a natural world. There is no space for supernatural entities in this world. And humanizing scientific activity. Scientists are not the mysterious man, they are not alchemists. What they are doing is not something mysterious, supernatural, but it is something very human. Okay? This is another emphasis. So the mode of thinking that he spread was rational, based on causal relationship and liberated from mysteries. I will share you an example. So when he discussed photosynthesis, he jumped to a different issue, which is the genies, the jinn. So he mentions that it is commonly believed that among the people, jinns or genies, they use the trees at night as their home or as their habitat. So it was not advised to sleep under trees at night. Okay? So this is a common belief that Şemseddin Sami shares with us. It is no more a common belief, but it seems that it had been then. So he says that this must have been related to photosynthesis because like plants, they produce oxygen in the morning, in the sunlight, and carbon dioxide at night. So somehow, he suggested, because of the carbon dioxide produced by the trees at night, people used to feel uncomfortable, under the trees at night, and therefore they connected it to the existence of jinns, which is not the case. So for this kind of supernatural entities, he gives scientific explanation. So the aim is clear, I think. He tries to construct a scientific nature, a scientific universe, where there is no place for the supernatural. But it is not so simple. So the whole process is much more complex, and I will now enter what is very complex about it. Keeping in mind that that kind of writing constitutes the bulk of his writing. Okay? Now I'm moving to the rest, which is very important. So, in an article called "The Benefits of Ilm," Sami tries to find a place for the new science. I know that you cannot see the slide, but what was important was that he tried to reconfigure all the spheres of authority. His message or his aim was to find a legitimate place for the modern sciences. Okay? And he argued that in his writing, the obvious, the apparent argument was that the new sciences that the Ottomans are taking from the West were only new expressions of the traditional and religious sciences. So there is nothing new about the new sciences. This was the apparent language, okay? The obvious one. And he explained that ilim, science, can be has two focuses. One is material world, the other is the immaterial world. Okay? In the language of religion and tradition, the material world is called this worldly world, okay, dunyevi, and the spiritual or the immaterial world is called the otherworldly field. And within the immaterial world, there is the field of intellect and there is the field of conscience. In the language of the religion, it corresponds to the field of belief, İttifakı, and the field of amel, practice. So by giving a very simple, this is a very simple map, okay? By giving, and he doesn't give a map, he just writes, I draw the map based on his writing. But the message is what is transferred from the West, the new sciences, is not new. They are only new expressions of the good old, same tradition and religious concerns. But he also wants to make a point. So if it is the same thing, why are you introducing this, right? So he makes some differences. When we closely scrutinize his language, that despite the apparent similarity or similarity between the modern and the traditional and religious sciences, in the details or in the selecting of his wordings, we can see that he reconfigures the authority of the modern sciences and the traditional sciences, giving the superior hand to modern sciences. For instance, he says that there's the old sciences, or in the old approach to sciences, the function of ilm is to transfer wealth from a certain section of society to another one. So you are a bureaucrat, okay, and thanks to your ilm, thanks to your knowledge, you transfer a certain wealth produced by the, let's say, peasants to your own pocket. So the function of the old ilm, or the old approach to ilm, is to transfer wealth. But the modern ilm does not simply transfer wealth. It creates wealth out of nothing, okay? And he gives various examples. He says, today ilm produces wealth from nothing. Today's ilm is productive and fruitful, unlike the old ilm, okay? Today's ilm is bread that can be eaten and cloth that can be put on. And whoever does not appeal to it goes hungry. So on the one hand, he makes two things. On the one hand, he argues that this is not something very different. This is part of our tradition, But from another perspective, he tries to give the upper hand to the new sciences. The trick is here, there are no different concepts for science. They all use the same concept, which is ilm. Okay? So there is no clear differentiation between modern science and the traditional sciences. So this taxonomy is one example. Another strategy is in this discursive struggle for moral authority is to assign traditional powers of science to the modern science. For instance, when he talks about physics and chemistry, he assigns physics and chemistry the power of like discovering truth, okay? And physics and chemistry, by studying the universe, by studying the physical world, it discovers truth, which has on its own a moral authority, right? The science which discovers truth must be superior in authority. So modern sciences are leveled with the traditional sciences. They are exalted sciences. They are Ali sciences. And whoever is unaware of these new sciences are in the class of the ignorant, jahil. Okay, so by like similar discursive plays, or not plays, but processes, he assigns the moral authority, which had been traditionally assigned to religious and other traditional sciences, to the new natural sciences. So I just summarize, like in his writings, you can see that the modern sciences are described as path to truth. They discover the mysteries and truth of the creation of the universe. They are exalted sciences. They purify creed. This was really something interesting for me. So if you study physics and chemistry and biology, tezkiye, yes. yeah, tezkiye. It's also not only creed, but also it will create people morally superior. And that's another discussion.
Yes.
That's a whole different discussion, whether studying and learning modern sciences makes you a better person or not. Yeah. So they enhance morality, and whoever does not know the new sciences are ignorant, whoever knows them are knowledgeable. So a total redefinition of who is alim and who is jahil, etc. Another example is to change the meanings, the traditional meanings. So he, for instance, take this phrase, كل شيء يرجع إلى أصله. Everything returns to its origin, independent of the way it was used in various different traditions. Sami says that this was a principle of Islamic philosophy. He mentions hikmet, okay, rather than philosophy, Islamic hikmet. And we could not have discovered its meaning so far. Its true meaning is animals, vegetables, minerals, they are in constant cycle of decomposition and recomposition. So returning to Asil meant for him recomposition and decomposition. So he is benefiting from the moral authority of a traditional maxim and reinterprets it for the sake of promoting chemistry. Okay? Another one is a hadith, La raha fi dunya. There is no joy and leisure in this world. So he says this hadith has been understood as there is no leisure, joyfulness in this world. But he says it is wrong. Okay? Rather, it should be understood as there is no rest and idleness in this world. Okay? Everything in this world, from the stars to the most minus element, they're all in motion. Okay, so they're all in motion. Okay, so he says he uses the hadith, okay, and conceptualizes it in a different way. I don't say right or wrong, but in a totally different way. One is the principle of chemistry, the other is the principle of physics. So what are the consequences? What do we learn from this? So he obviously anchors modern science in the traditional framework of ilm, and he legitimizes modern sciences and assigns them the authoritative traits of traditional conceptions of ilm. Most importantly, to discover the truth. But meanwhile, so far so good, but at the same time, the meaning of truth and reality is totally, transformed. So truth means like the physical truth, or the equations that we come up with the physical worlds. This is the truth. So So the transformation works in two ways. New sciences are authorized based on traditional language, traditional accumulation of knowledge, but meanwhile the traditional meanings themselves are totally transformed, even subverted. So a second consequence, which I thought, while I was writing this, I thought this was very strong, but now I think it's a weak consequence. I would like to hear what you think. By virtue of referring to the tradition and its power of creating legitimacy, the authority of traditional discourse was confirmed. So because you create legitimation for the new sciences, by referring to the authority of the traditional sciences, you confirm its authoritative power, okay? And hence this might explain the longevity of tradition and traditional concepts. They don't go away. Asil is there. Hakikat, truth is there, okay? Because the new was also legitimized by referring to the old. But meanwhile, their meanings have been totally changed, like hakikat, mystery, asil, origin. So origin now means like the elements maybe, okay? Or ilim and sai and amal, hard work, means like physical hard work for worldly life, okay? Okay, now I will move to, closer to my title, what is Deist about his language. So, reminding you again, most of his language is modern scientific language. But whenever there are opportunities, he also involved what can be called natural theology. So, natural theology basically means to reach to the idea of God, the existence of God, and his attributes by observing nature, without necessarily referring to the revealed theology, revealed scripture. So it is a way, it's a method of proving the existence of God by examining nature, okay? It is basically the old argument from design. But there is a trick here. If someone can reach the existence of God unaided by scripture, unaided by revelation, only by observing nature and only by using his reason, so what is the use of revelation? So Deism, historically, is a follow-up of natural theology. And so from avoiding scripture, it reaches to rejection of scripture. So Sami does not reject scripture, okay? That's why I call it an Islamicate deism. A deism which is evolved within the Islamicate culture. And I will talk more about it. So the language, but one important thing is the agency of the reader. So he uses a language which I will share some examples, in which you see some form of natural theology, okay? But remember, I mentioned that his purpose was to spread science. His purpose is not to create more devout, more pious Muslims. So his purpose is not salvationist. His purpose of talking about nature and occasionally using natural theological arguments is not an apology. He does not defend religion vis-a-vis science, or he does not want to create more pious Muslims. His only purpose is to spread science within an Islamic milieu. But we have the agency of the readers. So it is up to the reader whether to use these natural theological arguments for his or her own piety, or just skip them and stop at being a deist. I believe in God, but I don't care about the scripture whatsoever. So the agency of the reader is very important again. So some elements in his natural theological language. So he talks about the universe as a book. God is the author of this book. And ilim is understood as the points of the book of nature which stemmed from the eternal pen of creator. So he mentions these. And from amazement with nature, he sometimes, occasionally, skips to veneration of God at what I call the moments of wonder. So when you describe a natural event, there are sometimes there is a moment of wonder. For instance, the oxygen, the composition of air. He talks about the composition of the air, the elements in the air, and it is composed basically of oxygen and nitrogen. But oxygen is combustive, right? It is not good for breathing. Nitrogen, neither. But the percentage of these gases are composed in such a delicate level, we can breathe air. So this is a moment of wonder with nature, which you can use, which we can, from the wonder of nature, you can move to the wonder or amazement and veneration of God. It's up to the reader.
So it's very Bediüzzaman.
It is very argument from design. Like, it is there. Or when he describes water crystals, he cannot hold himself from saying that as if they were the handwork of a skillful artisan, etc. But finally ending with, there are like strange laws of crystallization. Okay, so there are laws, there is an explanation, but they are so strange. So this strangeness is a moment of wonder. Okay. So these are some natural theological elements in his language. But does this make him a man of natural theology? No, it does not. When we look at his vocabulary closely, when we examine his usage of like creation and nature, hilkat and tabiat, for instance, he uses them interchangeably. There is no difference for him between hilkat and tabiat. And in fact, creation and nature like constitutes the horizon where the sacred and profane meet. And this is very important. I think it's also related to the ecology project. Like, right? It is where the sacred and profane meet is, nature or creation is this area. So it's open to all these religious or mystical experience. It's very important. But when I looked at carefully his usage of like nature and creation, creation is used only as an object. But nature he uses sometimes as subject and object. So his conception of nature was very reified. So he hypostatized nature as a subject, which violates all the rules of religious grammar. What I mean by this is he uses nature in a way that fulfills the functions of God. So the reified nature is kind of God. So when you pick off nature and replace it with God, it doesn't change for him. Or pick off God and put there nature. His grammar is perfectly fine, but this violates the Islamic grammar. I'll give you an example here. For instance, he says, nature solves silica in the soil with an amazing, mysterious chemical force. This is one sentence. So in another sentence, he says, the owner of nature created specific animals. In another sentence, he says, the nature created such and such qualities. So the syntactical location of God and nature reified, the reified nature, are the same. So he uses nature as if he is God. This is why I don't think his natural theology does not make his language a natural theological one. His is more a deist language. So God, for Şemseddin Sami, is the owner of nature, but he is bounded by the laws of nature. Okay? And sometimes he explains the laws of nature as it is the will of God. So the laws of nature from a religious perspective can be understood as the will of God. But this is not the Islamic will of God. It is very much conditioned, right? It is not an unconditioned God if we are going to take him seriously. One more element which makes his natural theology not a salvationist one is there are like a tone of pantheism in his language as well. Very rarely, but there is. For instance, let me read it. It is the same one force which moves a microscopic worm in a single drop of vinegar and which moves a huge sphere within the courtyard of the space and the universe. All of them are subject to a single law. All are alive with a single life. All are swimming in a single universal spirit. So it is, the vagueness is obvious. Okay? You cannot decide what he talks about. Does he mean a force? Does he mean God? Or is he pantheistic? So it is not very clear. Finally, he concludes with a well-known maxim, glory to him who amazes the intellect with his art. So probably he means God here, but it is not very clear. And I'm not sure whether he really means God. Okay? So, like the God of Sami, at moments of amazement, he is the owner of nature, he is the unequaled craftsman, he is the eternal chemist, and amazing sculptor. But this God works his art out of nature within the natural laws, but not necessarily ex nihilo, out of nothing. Okay? And this is a concept of God within a deist language of science that would not violate the positivist methods of modern science. It does neither challenge the God of Islam, but I think undermines some of his powers. Okay. Like in the rest, I will skip the rest, but I will mention you some areas that I'm thinking about. So we can more think about a natural morality. He talks about nature as a source of morality, and the connection here is that nature is created by God. If nature is created by God, then it is God's will. It's a consequence of God's will. So by examining nature, then, we can understand God's will. And if you involve too much into it, you can create a morality based on nature. So he does not theorize about it. He does not suggest to derive a morality out of nature, from nature, but he gives some examples of it. In fact, let me go back. So this like, la raha fit dunya. He gives an example of it. So there is no rest and idleness in this world. Is this simply an observation, or is it a moral imperative? So here he made a connection between the two. When you observe the nature, you see that everything is in motion. Nothing stays rest, which is natural or by creation. Okay, if it is by creation, then it reflects the will of God. So if the will of God dictates to the nature or creation that nothing stays in idleness, everything has to be in motion, then we human beings are also charged, and he explicitly says that, especially Muslims, we are also charged with like hard work, sa'i and amal. Okay? So he derives like moral consequences from observing nature, but he does not theorize about it. Okay, so this is one issue, the connection between nature and morality. The other issue is evolution. He talks about evolution, but not in an explicit way. He is very careful in his language. He introduces Darwin, but he's not a Darwinian. He is more a Lamarckian. His understanding is more Lamarckian. He misses all the crucial concepts that Darwin contributed. And his language is very careful. His wording is very careful. For instance, when he talks about the lands and seas, he says like formation of lands, like a more neutral vocabulary. Appearance of life, okay? Appearance of senses. But when it comes to mankind, he uses the word creation, hilkat. He does not use it for the previous phases. Okay, conclusion. So, let me read it. Sami's popular scientific language was a deist one. Nevertheless, it was one developed within the Islamicate tradition and one that primarily addressed Ottoman Muslim sensibilities. He never challenged the God of Islam. That is why Sami's deism should be better seen as an attitude that may be consciously preferred, not to follow deism to its logical consequences. So when in the title it says deism, but I think it is more an attitude rather than a philosophical conviction. Okay. Instead, within this deist attitude, Sami wanted to address and transform a Muslim society without challenging its fundamental religious convictions. And Islamicate deism seems to have provided a language of science for Ottoman Muslims, and this language enabled the scientific study of a demystified world, while occasionally presenting it as a place of manifestation of God's mercy and wisdom, though not letting God be a part in the causal explanation of natural phenomena. It was ultimately to the reader which aspect of this language he or she wanted to focus on. So I stop here. Thank you for your patience.